Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad you're joining us today for our first ACEware Users webinar for 2019. Chuck's going to spend the first two webinars of this year talking about student manager preferences. These settings allow you to set up Manager to meet your particular needs, and with so many options, it's going to take two sessions for Chuck to thoroughly cover this topic. He'll provide a refresher on the classic preferences, as well as give some updates on the new preference settings we have available. As I turn things over to the Master of Manager, I'll remind you that you can send me your questions and comments in the chat box. I'll get those to Chuck as needed. The webinar is being recorded and will be added to the webinar archives on aceware.com. That way you can return as you wish for a refresher or share with your colleagues and encourage them to view as well. So Chuck, we're seeing your screen. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Very good. Well, thank you, Sharon. And again, thanks to everybody for braving the weather wherever you are to join us. We are crisp in Kansas. It's snow on the ground and freezing weather, so it is January, so that be expected. What are we going to do? Well, first of all, to what we're not going to cover, we're only looking at three of the main sets of preferences, and we'll go over the whole group in the two sessions, but this one will only look at system names and org preferences. Wanted to kind of do more of a deep dive into preferences. We've done preferences for some of you. I see some seasoned, notice I didn't say old, seasoned ACEware participants here, or customers. We've done a couple of these before, but this one we're going to spend a little bit more time maybe doing some examples. So we'll be getting it into it. Always, we'll talk about the different categories of preferences, the WWCD, which we'll talk about, and of course, Student Manager Online Help, and that's certainly, if there's anything that certainly new people are going to want to take away, is that do use the force. That is the Student Manager Help Guide. So, what's it all about? Well, when you use ACEware, Student Manager, AceWeb, you've got choices, and you might look at all of those like a newbie would look at a cockpit of a plane, or going to a restaurant and ordering. Some of these are things that I guess, like a plane, make things go up and down. And then there are others that really are preferences. How do you want, what would you like on your menu? And that'll be the kind of thing that we're going to be reviewing. So in terms of how Student Manager is going to work for you, it depends on your preferences. And Sharon, I believe you've got a poll question for everybody right now.
I do, Chuck, and I'm putting that up on the screen right now. I hope everyone's seeing that. We want to know, when was the last time you took a look at your preferences? So take a look at these options here and give us an answer of whether it's been in the last month or you just are now excited that you have choices. So I see responses coming in. I'll close that in just a second. About 75% of you have responded. Let's get the rest of you on this. All right, Chuck, I'm going to close this poll and I'm going to share it on the screen with you. There you go, Chuck. Take a look at that.
Well, the did know you have a choice. Hopefully, that will definitely be covered here. You'll know you've got choices here. So, how do you get to preferences? Well, if you use the launch screen in the middle, it's Edit Preferences. Otherwise, from the menu, it's Edit Preferences. All right, and I don't know how many of you are the keeper of the flame. That is kind of your student manager administrator on campus. But whoever the administrator or student manager does get to allow or disallow a staff member, that is a user within your campus who's logged on, has a log on to student manager, the ability to edit their own preferences. And so you'll see that under the password maintenance, allow edit of preferences. Moving into preferences themselves, one of the things we're going to note is there are color differences of them. And the differences are black is user specific. So again, if you have allowed or your campus allows individual users to set their own permissions, the black items will be ones they can change, and that will be unique to their own login. So they'd be able, if you have two different departments using one copy of Manager, like the South Dakota folks, one department can actually allow their users to turn on some different settings internally than the other department. And it's perfectly fine because it won't affect the data. It'd just be the view typically of the data fields. The other one is the global. Blue is global. Those are the codes that once changed, everybody who uses Student Manager will be affected by that. And then there's a unique set of level 6 that are purple colored, and those are not master, or those are not global across the system, but they are ones that in order to change that level, the user must have a high level of access and in at least the area names, course, register that the preference exists. And then finally, we clarified just recently, we've added to the main screen, and you'll see a little cheat sheet on this just as you go along. One of the other things for, again, folks new to looking at preferences, that depending on your access, you will have an administrator view or a non-administrator view, and that is whether or not you can get to global preferences. If you don't have global preference access, or you're not the administrator, you can see all of the codes, but some of them are not editable, and you see the ones in gray here. If you are an administrator, and a couple of you are, I'm sure, you will actually see all of the items. Some of them are labeled, colored in blue, and those are items that you will be able to edit and modify. Preferences. Well, this is a little sidebar about how they're stored, but user preferences are referenced by your user ID when a user is given a user ID to log into Student Manager. ACEware has, Student Manager has a way to set as default preferences. And the idea here is if you're a new system, Ray, there, you can take one of your staff users, go through all of these preferences that we're going to be talking about here, and once those preferences are defined for Joe or Fred or Betty or Nancy, you can take Nancy's password setting and make her profile, if you would, the standard default profile. Now, for real large groups like out in Vegas, you can also do some settings by group. So you see the option here to scope by a group. And again, if you're wanting to do some synchronization of that, we can, visit with AJ or me about how to go about doing that. So again, it's a way to standardize your settings for preferences. On the preferences area, and this is their default preferences screen, you'll note that every major screen of Student Manager has a separate preference setting tab. So you can really get pretty granular with that. I was going to do a census of just how many preferences we've got. Sharon, do you remember what we've said on that the last time? Over 100.
We have over 150, Chuck. Over 150.
Over 150 different preferences. All right, what are the different things preferences do? We talked about that earlier. The big one is, probably the biggest number, is enabling and disabling fields. And basically, this allows your program to turn on fields, turn off fields, based on whether you need them or not. And generally, our recommendation is until you need the field, turn it off, and then when you're ready to start using it, turn it on, and it shows up on your screen. Control field behavior. And this labels for fields. Is it validated? Is it encrypted? Some of these you can set a default value. And then another big one is controlling system behavior. And this gets into more, I guess, preferences as to how you might want to work the system, like turning on different features, name grouping, callback tickler, email reminders, how you do cloning for courses. Those are behavior type questions. And then finally, some of them are combination of behavior and we say performance settings. And the three big ones on here are, in the system level, is disable first word search, turbo search mode, allow turbo option. And again, these are more critical if you have a slow network or if you have a really large database. And again, like out in Nevada there, where you have a real large database, you want to kind of pay attention to these performance settings to see, make sure that you've got them set up to be optimum for your situation. We said about going into a deep dive into the system. So again, we're going to hit these three sets of preferences today. And again, I'm going to be asking as you go along to feel free to give me your comments and notes. As always, write your notes in the text box, and Sharon will get those to me. So one of the things we also want to hit is WWCD, which is what would Chuck do? And I'm going to give you my editorial sermonizing or soapbox of what I would recommend for most users for some of these preference areas. First screen is system, and again, it has some base systems in it, the couple of your performance elements. And again, before we go a whole lot further, I want to clarify or emphasize, specifies that Jason is your buddy because he's the one that develops or maintains now. Thanks for the base for Cheryl Scott, who built it originally. But he is the current keeper of the ACEware online help. And how you get to that, we're going to get to our browser. And so basically, you launch the online help system either from the little red help book on your on your student manager menu, or you can go to it from the help guide on the ACEware website. I would go to the preferences setting, search that, and that will take you to the preferences list, system preferences. So here is the list of system preferences in the help guide, and Jason and Cheryl have an alpha list of all the different settings that those particular ones include. And we're gonna take a minute and actually go through some of these online here with you. So, first of all, disabled first word search. That is one that will allow you an alternate way of looking up students. And to illustrate that, right now my preference on this is that it's off. What that means is that when you do look up names, it automatically pulls up the entire database, shows you all of the names, and when you start typing Anderson, A-N-D, it begins to filter out letter by letter what names match up to that particular set of letters. Now, if you have a large database, slower network, that can get to be somewhat slow. It takes several seconds in between keystrokes. So if for you, you might want to turn on disable first word search, which then gives you, when you hit the search mode, an empty lookup screen, and ACEware Manager doesn't start to search until you hit enter or tab out of your data entry screen. So I do A-N-D-E, and then when I hit enter, it'll look for those set of names that we're searching for. And again, you can also do that with a combination of names, A-N-D-E space C-A-R, Carol. So again, you might want to experiment with that. You might want to experiment with that when you're working in the system. Turbo search mode, again, that's another way of being able to perhaps try to speed things up. What that does is disables the ability to sort your list of names or your names by a particular category. Let's try that again. So if I wanted everybody from a certain zip code, 6650, I'm looking up by zip code. It gives me all the 6650. If I wanted to sort this column now by city, I can click on the city, any one of the headers, and I can sort my lookup view. What the turbo mode is disables that sort, and in some cases that can speed things up. Status bar allows you to see the table you're in, the record you're in, and a little bit of data about where you are in the system. Unless you have a very small screen or you're using a very high screen resolution, I said low screen resolution, where everything is real big, I would leave that on. I think this is kind of helpful to have at the bottom. Again, folks, questions, feel free to write them in there, and if I skip over something, come back. We'll go through that. System sound. Again, this determines how much beeping your student manager is going to do at you. You can turn it off, leave it irregular. And the special is if you've got any Star Wars fans out there, have them send me an email, and I have a special treat for you that involves a special button. So that'll be your little Easter egg to follow up later. Skip count checking. This is what, when you are looking at the name list, it will automatically update the number of courses taken. Generally, you don't need to do that. It does slow things down a little bit, but I'd leave that on unless your network is really, really slow. Ditto with allow turbo option. If you have a really large database, it'll help you speed up deadbeat reports. That's the only area that works for. Prompt for print after showing reports. Now, if you're looking at your own preferences, which you should be doing after this, you may not see that. Well, if you don't have that, the reason is you do not have the most current print preview set of tools. And what that does is, if you're running a report, and I'm going to run favorite reports now, a deadbeat, my favorite report area. So this is what you get with the new report preview. Basically, you can either have a one-page side-by-side or a quad-page display of a report. And again, if you've got a lot of pages in a report, that might be a handy way to go about viewing your reports. So again, how you get that, going back to our website, and I hadn't got that yet. Under your customers, student manager resources, tools, you have a zip file, report preview. I'll just download that, unzip it into your manager directory, and you'll have that new report option. Enable email blacklist. Sharon, how are we doing? Anything popping right now?
You're doing just fine, Chuck.
Enable email blacklist system. And this allows you, if you've got a student or if you have a case where you have students that are saying, do not put me on your email, don't add my email to your list for promotional purposes, you can blacklist a person's email. And especially if someone says, I hate you, I don't like you, don't ever send anything to me from XYZ again, if they were to come in later and you add their name from a mailing list and you put in that email, it'll warn you that that email is on a blacklist. So I guess unless you have some really, really nasty customers that you want to deal with, you could probably ignore that. ACEweb URL, this is the stem of your ACEware URL, ACEweb URL, so that when you're working on courses, you can go ahead and click on the preview ACEweb status page, and that'll allow you to do an automatic preview of what this is going to look like online. ACEware Skin, that is for your multiple interfaces if you have alternate interfaces. A couple of you do, I know. Hide backup for user level. Now again, the backup warning system in Student Manager, you can set it up to remind you over here how many days between backups do you want to be reminded. Well, you probably don't need to have every registrar getting that backup warning message when you really want just a few people to be the ones responsible for that. So that's a way for you to limit that. Preferred browser, again, on the preferred browser, it's a way for you to change if you don't like Internet Explorer and you want to use Chrome or you want to use Firefox, you can actually navigate to the launching executable for whatever your favorite browser is, and Student Manager will use that when it goes to like launch your help guide or to do mapping some of the other internal routines. Secure PDFs. This is a new option that allows you, this is relatively new in the past year or so, but when you're doing exporting reports as PDFs, say a transcript, it disallows the ability to edit the PDFs. So that might have some function for you. Log SQL is internal for tracking, and the help guide says you don't turn that on unless your tech asks you to. Map key is for the ACEware mapping tool, the new map key for Bing that you have to have. Macro keys, again, if you haven't used macro keys, we encourage you to do that. I'm going to actually get back to, we've kind of skipped through here, store keys for pasting. One of the things, you can use a month, day, year, month, day, year combo as a way to store a date range. And that's useful for when you're doing quarterly reporting and you're running a whole set of quarterly reports. One of the other things, and we talked earlier about not allowing users permission to edit their full set of preferences, no matter whether your administrator has turned off or on the ability of a user to edit preferences, the My User profile has a few of the really private type preferences on the screen look, your alt keys, how you want to do autocomplete, and the disable first word search, just from the My User profile. And I think we've done that, and you can see how this examples of how you might have different settings. Excuse me. What would Chuck do? And again, I think we've been kind of going through that in Manager. I got way too much stuff open of which ones I would set. And again, I like both for the launch bar, and certainly I would try to get that new print setting. And if, like I said, I love the sound, so I would have mine set at special. Okay. So next, names. Any wrap-up questions on the courses so far?
Nope, you're doing just fine.
Carmel, if you're down there, could you bring me up a soda cracker? I'm gonna call out for some help on my crackers here. Sorry about that, guys. Looking at the name screen, lots of preferences in here. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight is in, I think, both names, register and course, we generally have the system organized into two areas. Thank you, Carmel. Carmel is my mission of mercy here. Get a little cracker down to help the frog there. But the top part of the system is system is basically enabling fields or configuring your data fields. So things like relabeling and setting up some preferences. I wanted to highlight a couple of things in the new category, occupational code organization. I believe the phone number fields now have the ability to be relabeled. So if you like, instead of saying day phone or pager or home phone, you could say night phone and day phone. Again, it allows you to modify how those will look within the student manager screens. The other thing is occupation, organization, preferred method of communication. These are data fields. If you end up needing to use a lot of preference fields on your name record and you don't need to use these fields for the intended purpose, you could relabel those, use those for a different purpose within your system. A couple of things on the overlooked variety, and I'm going to actually back up on that. Let's go back to. Let's hang on a second. I've got going the wrong direction here. Here we go. Okay, so those are kind of some big overview items. Wanted to start to go through here the system behavior preferences, and then we'll go back to what I would consider some of the overlooked items. We'll get the overlooked items right off the bat as we go through. Some of the things in the preferences area that to me get overlooked are, number one, the use of the name character 1 field. That is a 30-character field, so it's a big one. And if you need a larger character field on the name record, that's one that's on the main screen, I believe. No, well, we'll check on that. But that's one that is often overlooked. Callback feature. Again, this is the name tickler callback feature. It's a great feature. I use it with my copy of Student Manager that I use as my marketing database. And basically, it allows you to put in a date to call a student back for either marketing or service reasons in X number of days in the future. Name grouping, that's right here. Enable name grouping. Those of you that have families, you do things with family level. Husband, spouse, or parents and kids, it allows you to group together a set of names. They may or may not be the same last name, may or may not be the same address, but you can kind of group them into a family group or an affinity group for just identification purposes. Default sort, that's right here, default sort for name screen. That determines when you're going forward, backward with your arrow keys, what is the sort feature on it. ID lookup, and this is one right here. Use ID as primary find key. That is one that unless you use the name ID key in Student Manager for a real ID, hardly anybody uses social, but unless you use that as a real ID, I would turn that off because it basically will give you more room to look up other parts or to see other parts of a significant name record. And again, while I get into the other, I'd invite you to say if you've got a favorite preference on this or any of the other 2 or 3 I've mentioned, jot those in to Sharon so I can maybe give that a shout out before we leave this. All right, let's roll back to, again, WWCD. How would Chuck set this up in his copy of Manager? How do you back? Hang on, I keep skipping by the one I want. Okay, so in the names, kind of things I would do. Number one, I would certainly uncheck the use ID as a primary find key. I would use my callback dates. I would enable name grouping if I have any combination of people that might work for that. So a couple of things that determine validate label info. That's an interesting one in that on the name record, when you are doing a flag name, label flag, the point of that label flag is to be able to let you mark names that you want to send a mail out to that would be requesting information, a catalog mail out. So they say, I want the fall, spring now, spring catalog. So I got Holly Biggs wants the spring catalog, and Butterfield wants the kids camp, and somebody else wants another code and another code and another code. When you mark those names for a label, you can go to mailing labels, click print mark labels, and it'll give you the mailing address of that person, and it'll actually stamp on that label, overwriting the upper right corner, what it is that that person wanted. So that's a way to flag what it is this person might want you to mail them. And then when you're done printing that, it'll reset the print label flag. Now, what the validate label info does is if you're wanting to allow, when you're putting in these codes, to say, I only want to pick, when I do print label, code 1, 2, 3, or I want to be able to have only 3 items listed and have it always be precise every time. Fall catalog, spring brochure, kids camp, security, testing. Those are the only 4 things I want. That's what you can do with the print label. Okay, display deadbeat info. This is where you can show at the bottom of the name screen if they owe money or don't owe money. And again, the only reason why you wouldn't display that would be, again, if your system is slow and you think it takes a while to bring a name up, balance due 350. Normally that should be fairly quick, but the only reason for turning that off would be, again, slow network. View source code by description. That just changes the preference as to which list shows first, the description or the code itself. Set mail address preference if you're using preferred address option. Use province. That's only valid if you're one of our up north of the border. That's for the Canadians who like to use province code. Hide the history for name level less than 5. This was added in there in case you wanted to be able to store data in the name history here for a name record that might be confidential. And you say, well, only people with a name level access higher than a certain level should be able to see the contact history contents. So it's, again, a way to kind of put behind a privacy door some information about a student. Enable name grouping, we talked about that. And again, the way that works is that on a name record, the grouping button here, it says allows you to group family members. Well, if the 2 Andersons were connected, I would add Carol Bobby's already on there. You can't add him to that as well. I'm going to add Carol to that as well. So now we've grouped Bobby and Carol together on that. I had mentioned the idea of the sort option as one of the preferences. Again, if you have a program where you use firm names and you often are looking up students within a given firm, if you switch this to by firm name, once you land on one student from a company, you can do right arrow. Now watch Bobby. We're going to go Sarah Stokes, Lewis and Clark, Lewiston High School. So basically, it allows you to, skip alphabetically by firm rather than alphabetically by name. So again, that is something you can set as a preference on on the name record. Enabling a drop-down list on empty field. You're going to see this option on most the main 3 screens, and the difference there is when you're on a name record and you're adding data, ACE space, and you get to a drop-down field, we tab into the drop-down field. The drop-down automatically pops as you tab into the field. I'm doing this tabbing rather than having to click into the field and put in the drop-down or put in the value. Again, you can experiment with that. You can experiment with that and see. I generally have that off because I'm used to that, but that's up to you. Senior fee category, this is a new feature. It allows you, if you're doing discounts for seniors, Ollie people probably, you wouldn't be using that, you're using your membership, but if you have an open enrollment type program, but you do offer senior discounts, you can actually put in an age number here, and automatically then, if their birthday is such that they're over 63, it'll automatically look for a senior citizen fee on the registration, on the course fees, and if it's there, it will assign it to them automatically. So that's kind of a new feature if you haven't used that before. First name match in ad mode, and again, I'm going through this, guys, but it's basically what you're going to be seeing if you go to the help guide and look up names, and you can see we're going through I'm basically going through this process right here. First name match in ad mode, it determines if you're adding a brand new name, how many letters of the first name do you match when trying to say there's a potential duplicate in the database. And again, from my perspective, 3 or 4 is about right. Go back X number of days to check old callbacks. That again is something for me. The point is, if you're using the callback feature and you know you're going to be out of town for X number of days, you want to put that callback number of days, lag days, if you would, far enough so that you'll catch any callbacks that you might have scheduled to fall, and you're going to be out of the office for a week. And again, 10 days, 2 weeks is probably in the right range. Talked about use ID as primary find key. And again, I have it turned off. If I have it turned on, and you're going to see that ID number in the middle of the column, and it basically takes up space. If you're really not using that ID number field, disable it. Hide it, uncheck it, and then when you're looking up, you basically get a few more columns over on the right for you to be able to use for what you really want to use, and that is see critical data about a student that'll help you find them. Warn if ID is not entered, and that's if you are requiring staff to enter some kind of student ID manually. Most people don't do that. Warn when entering duplicate email. That's self-explanatory. I recommend turning that on. Doesn't keep you from entering 2 emails or the same email for different people. It does warn you if accidentally you start to add a Joe Smith and it's Joseph Smith or J Smith, but the email's the same. It's another way to help you avoid duplicates from student manager's side. Ditto with the duplicate member number. Again, if you use the member number field for coding, and duplicate code field 2. Some of you use the code field 2 for Social Security number, which, and you'll note here, you can encrypt it, and you could actually have it look for duplicates on new name entry. Disable area code fill-in. This is that when you're adding a zip code, by default, it'll put in the area code for that zip code. If you're in a metro area with tons of area codes in a short area, or you have everybody has a cell phone from all over the country, you could disable that if you wanted. Special needs pop-up, new feature. What this allows you to do is on that warning message. If I go to Harris, or I'll Havlicek, I think I've got a special warning message. Hard of hearing, just yell at him. And I know UNLV has had some issues with this where there's a bunch of legacy special needs notes that they don't want to see. If you just are tired of that and you don't want to see them anymore, you can turn that off, and then that won't pop up. Now, again, I would encourage you to use the special needs pop-up, but just clean up the ones that aren't relevant for you. Default interest code identifier. This is a whole feature area that not very many people use, but I really think that it's one that ought to be used more, in that within the interest codes, you have the ability to create subgroups of interest codes. So in the demo, we see adult programs, business and industry. Well, right now, this is adult programs. We said, well, if I'm doing business and industry and Cody says, I'm interested in your business and industry programs, then I might pop this up and I'd say, well, are you interested in management, marketing, sales, or supervision? And so forth and so on. If Cody says, I'm interested in health programs, you can then say, well, I'm interested, here are the options within health. It basically gives you a way to subgroup or create subgroups of interest codes. And again, for, what am I trying to say? Full service CE operations that you offer soup to nuts, I think that's something that would be useful. And again, what this does is that if I'm a staff member and my main responsibility is working with adult programs, I can have a preference on my personal setting that when I go to a name record to add interest codes, the first thing it's going to do is only present me with those interest codes that are in the adult programs category. So again, there's notes in the help guide on that. I encourage you to get in and look through that. Label for the credential tab, we'll cover that. Auto uppercase, proper case first and last, I would turn that on. Prevent ID number on brief entry, that's specialized, allows IDs under 9 characters. And probably you wouldn't be doing that for special circumstances that would be available. So the idea of, again, what would Chuck do on the name record? I think we've kind of covered, most of those as we've gone through there. Any questions, Sharon? I see a couple questions on the box there.
We do. Can you show in the name record where name code field 2 shows, please?
Sure. On the name
record. Thank you.
Yeah, and in fact, we're going to actually open up the help guide to in the help guide. I would point people to the screen layout, name screen. So again, what this allows you to do is to look at, this is where the name code 2 field is. But referring to your screen layout in the help guide is probably the best place because that's got kind of the default value setting for these fields. And it's kind of hard to tell when you're looking at the name screen itself because you might have relabeled. See, this is the default values. Well, right here, wage code. Well, that's really not wage code. That field in manager is, and this is where you have to sometimes go to the demographics, that is family type. It's the second one from the bottom. So wage code is the family type code. So I think that'd be the place I'd take you for that. All right, Sharon, what, any others?
I'm not seeing any other questions.
Okay, let me get back to preferences here. Okay, moving on. We're going to finish up here now with organization codes. Not as many things on this. This is basically where you have kind of the one-time setup and pretty much then you leave them alone. This is your base data about your program, and these are memory variables that can go on reports. Zip code format, unless you're from Canada, leave that alone. Domestic phone format, again, unless you want to change the way the phone is, that's with like the parens around the, or the dashes 3-3-4, unless you want to change that. Again, there's a thing for Canadian preferences in there. Date format, that's again for the Canadian folks if you want British versus American. And the big one here probably is your Social Security ID format. Many of you that have been using Student Manager for years, we used to put Social Security numbers in, and so had actually, you know, the 3-2-4. I would recommend that you leave that as open text, because that'll simplify combining names when you're doing the twin combine, the duplicate name combine. All right, well, that really kind of moves us through the org defaults here. So let's wrap up with a couple of tips on user-defined fields and some general preferences. Certainly, part of your preferences is, although this typically happens more in the initial setup and you don't revisit it, is your user-defined fields. So again, you have the ability within the user-defined field area to label the different user-defined fields. You got name, course, register, instructor, and pay. So labeling them is global. So whoever chooses that you as a group decide character field 1, you're going to store this in it, that's global. You can't necessarily use different labels for the same field. However, the use of the field, whether you have it on your data screen to tab through or to enter, is a local variable. So you see it's black. So a user with permission can turn that on and off. And again, you can always go back and relabel. You say, well, we no longer need to have the license number. We want to clear that, and we're going to use it for t-shirt size. You can do that. What I'd recommend is you get with your tech, and they can give you a code to clear the old values before you start using it for a new one, just to kind of keep it clean. Enable validation. This is something on number fields and character fields in the user-defined area. By putting a plus as the first character of the label of the field, you can have it be a validated field where you can add the options like you do with regular validation. What are the choices you're going to let a user have when they put a value in that field? One of the things that I don't think people do pay attention to or monitor as much as they should is the ability to do custom data display options. And in the name record, we have an edit UDF display that actually has 4 different display options. And what that determines is what gets displayed down here in the bottom of the name screen. So again, basically any piece of data from the name record, user-defined fields, or for that matter, even the use of a function to get information about an interest code or information about a specific registration, you can get to work with a user-defined field. On the course screen, there is one data display option, and it shows over underneath the enrolled and the wait list. And so whether you put the default registration fee, which is what this string does, or you put in how many days it is before it starts, again, any data element that you think would be useful that is a calculation or that jumps into one of the other data fields in the screen can be put there. And ditto with register. So what we're doing here is we're saying I want to show the type of the course that this registration belongs to. And where that will show is over here under tracking code, workshop or open or independent study or membership. It gives you a kind of a preview of that. Now, again, coming up with this value of the user display does involve needing to have some syntax. That is, you have to say some mother may I's properly in order to get that to work. What I'd recommend is if you want to do something a little bit more advanced and you're not following from the help guide, give your tech a call and they will be able to help you out with a magic formula in here that lets you show what you want to see. So, all right, well, homework for you guys. Again, I would say go in and take a look at your system preferences. Use that help guide. Use that help guide to set up your system. And again, I can't say enough about. Did we get to the help guide? Is that my? I got to find my. Now I got to get to the. I'm trying to find my Google. There we go. I'm still not on it. I was gonna make a highlight again to the help guide, but we'll let you skip on that right now. All right. Questions? Anything that we've not covered? I think, Sharon, you seem to be handling them.
I'm not seeing any questions, but I certainly expect we may see someone may do their homework assignment and they know how to find us or their tech to get those answered.
Yeah, get in there. Well, before we closed, a shout out. It is time to start registering for the users conference. We've got some registrations coming in. Got a great program. We're going to be in the city, the big city, Tinseltown, the 4th through the 7th of June. And we're going to hope for warm weather there. We're going to hope for less warm weather there, hopefully early June. Next month, we have a couple of webinars again. We're going to finish off preferences and, of course, our annual or our monthly software update on Wednesdays. So, well, Sharon, thank you. We managed to motor through. Do check your help guide. That help guide does give you. That's what I was trying to. There's my help guide right here. This help guide gives you the links again, screen by screen. Just click on the appropriate tab on your help guide, and it'll give you your little cheat sheet down on the bottom of what those features do. So, folks, thanks for coming in. Stay warm. Enjoy the afternoon, and we'll see you next month for part 2. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.